They want their package.
I think it's about 5:30, so welcome to the regular Tuesday, November 9th, Belton City Council meeting. Good to have you here. I think we're almost all home folks today, so appreciate everybody being here. The Pledge of Allegiance today to the U.S. flag will be led by Mayor Pro Tem David K. Lee. The Texas Pledge will be led by City Clerk Amy Casey, and I will be giving the invocation. All right, join me in the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day and thank you for the opportunity to serve our community. Help us to keep your will in mind as we make decisions that affect our fellow citizens. And especially this week, we ask your special blessing on all of our veterans, all those who've served us in the past and also those who are serving today. Please help keep them safe and place your hand of guidance upon all of them. We ask your forgiveness of our sins. In Christ's name we ask it. Amen.
Amen.
Don't think we have any public comments today. We call this meeting to order. Items 3 and 4 on the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the council and may be enacted by one motion. If anyone wishes to pull one, you may do so. Item 3, to consider the minutes of the October 26, 2021 council meeting. And item 4, to consider appointments and reappointments to the following boards and commissions. Library Board of Directors, Francis Fennessy. The BEDC Board of Directors, Joe Shepard. The Zoning Board of Adjustment, Rucker Preston alternate, and the Ethics Commission, Kang Dong.
I'd move that we accept the two items you presented.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Item number 5, to consider a resolution authorizing the publication of a notice of intent to issue a City of Belton, Texas combination tax and limited revenue certificates of obligation, Series 2022, in a maximum principal amount not to exceed $7 million. Mr. Rogers.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, we're going to talk about this notice of intention to issue certificates. Bear with me one second. So we've talked before, as we were going through our capital improvements program for 22 to 26, we have some cash funding for some of these major projects. These are the projects we've been talking about, $3.4 million for the elevated storage tank. I was going to use a budget amendment, this budget amendment we're going to talk about tonight, to set aside money to cash fund that project. The McFarland Estates water sewer improvements are in your fiscal year 22 budget for the water and sewer fund to cash fund that project. The 6th Avenue water line replacement is an $850,000 project that we plan to use bonds in 2023. And this Loop 121 pump replacement is a new project that popped up recently, critical in nature to replace the pumps at the Loop 121 pump station. So as we've been going through this project, again, we've talked about, well, interest rates are at historic lows, so maybe we should consider using bonds instead of cash to pay for these projects. So this is our 22 to 26 CIP. The projects that we're talking about, let's see if I can circle that one there. That's the elevated storage tank. This McFarland Estates for $1 million. All of those are in 2022. We're also talking about this $850,000 project that's in 2023. So what I want to bring your attention to is in 2023, we have almost $16 million worth of projects that we're talking about. And only these right here, from that 1.1 million to that 450,000, are not funded with a potential bond issuance. So kind of as it sits adopted, we may be looking at around if we do nothing, around $13 million worth of bonds that we have to issue in 2023. So, but why issue debt instead of when we have cash available? Well, again, we have that $13.7 million bond issuance. So what we could do is not issue the debt. I'm sorry, not use the cash for these projects that I just showed you today, and instead use $4.4 million to reduce that future bond issuance of $13,775. That would bring that bond issuance below $10 million, which makes it bank qualified. A bank qualified basically means your bonds are more marketable. And if your bonds are more marketable, we'll get more offers. And if we get more offers, our rates are typically lower. So the end result of that is possibly lower interest rates than we would have if it were 13 million. If we can issue less, if rates go up in 2023 a bit, and we issue only 9.3 million instead of 13.7, our cumulative interest rates would be lower. Interest payments would be lower. And obviously, if rates go up, that $4.4 million, the return on that would be greater. If rates are higher, you get a better return, internal rate of return, if you will, on that cash. So what does that kind of look like here? This is a really nifty chart here. The blue line that you see there represents using that $4 million of cash to cash fund the projects that we talked about, and then issuing a full $13.7 million of debt in 2023. And you can see the blue line is the cumulative interest payments over time, over the term of bonds, would end about there. 5.4, I think, is 4 million is that number. If you contrast that with instead of using that cash today, let's issue the bonds today, smaller amount of bonds today, and then carry that cash over and apply it to 2023 and issue only on the $9 million. You can see the cumulative interest payments are lower. And I think that totals around $500,000 in less interest that you would pay doing it this way, applying that cash to a higher interest rate. Now this spread, interest rate spread that I use there is a 1% spread in interest. Obviously, if rates don't go up 1% in 2023, the spread would be different, but you would still, it would still be advantageous to do it like this, to where you would use that cash tomorrow instead of today. Does that make any sense?
Yep.
I love that chart. So what we're talking about tonight is the combination tax and limited revenue certificates of obligations, series 2022. So let me be clear that even though these are COs, it'll be utility rate revenue, not property taxes, that are going to pay this debt. So when we go to market, what we're going to require, and it states in this resolution tonight, the maximum principal amount is $7 million. The maximum maturity date, I can't speak tonight, is August 1st of 2042. So it's 20-year bond. The TIC, or true interest cost, can't exceed 4%. And we're also going to include a call provision that no later than August 1st of 2031. So at the maximum. So we'll see what the market can bear with a call provision, but it won't be any later than that we could call the bonds if we had to. Make sense? So what do we expect if we go to market, say in January? What we're seeing is kind of a 2.15 to a 2.4% possibility. Our cost of issuance would be about $125,000, which would mean debt payments of $395,000 a year. So even though this resolution and all says $7 million is the maximum amount, what it would really take to get to fund the construction of those projects plus pay cost of issuance and all is really closer to 6.2 million. So we have some wiggle room there in between the maximum and what we kind of really expect that we'll need. So total principal and interest on that at a 2.4 rate would be 7.9 million total P&I. So tonight's resolution is a notice of intent resolution. And what you're doing tonight is authorizing the publication of this notice of intent And that officially begins the bond issuance process. So we're going to publish in the newspaper, if you agree to this tonight, 3 consecutive weeks, we'll put this notice in the paper. It's going to be posted on our website continuously until we issue debt. And we're also going to start having some meetings. Well, so we got newspaper publications we have to pay for. We're going to have a meeting with bond rating analysts, and they charge us for the service of rating our bonds. So we might incur about $17,000 worth of expenditures prior to issuance. So what happens then if we do end up issuing bonds is all of those costs get rolled into the bond issuance amount. But if we decide in January, you'll see a calendar shortly. If you change your mind in January, we'll still have to pay these costs, that around 17,000 that we'll have incurred already. Because this is a certificate, citizens do have the right to petition to protest the issuance of those certificates. So if the city clerk receives a signed petition by 5% of the qualified voters protesting the issuance of these certificates, we'll have to have an election instead of just proceeding as we plan. That timeline is this. So we are at this point now, November 9th. We're doing this notice of intention to issue certificates. We'll publish those for 3 weeks. Again, have the public hearing is currently scheduled for December 14th. And then on January 11 is when we would have a competitive bond sale in the morning. Those offers and bids come in, they're reviewed by our financial advisor, and then later that night, our financial advisor will recommend who we would award the certificates to. It's at that time, that night, when you could say no. But again, as I said before, we will have already incurred some costs. Then if you say yes on January 11th, we would deliver those certificates on February the 8th, and that's when we get our cash for the projects. So the big picture of this whole discussion is we planned on it initially, just as we were going through the CIP discussion with council, on using $4.4 million of cash reserves for construction of North Belton Elevated Storage and McFarland Estates. You could decide to issue bonds instead, but I just want to point out that there's $1.2 million or so of interest expense that you would not have for that particular project. What I've tried to explain today, though, is it could be advantageous to go ahead and issue those bonds for these particular projects today, save that cash, and use that in 2023 when we are pretty certain we're going to have a very large bond issuance, and we're pretty certain that interest rates will be higher at that time. So using the cash to lower that 2023 issuance could have some financial benefit doing it this way. Our financial advisor, Jennifer Ritter, is here, as well as our bond counsel, Richard Donahue. If you have any questions of those two professionals who know much more about this than I do, we're all here to help.
Are we locked in on the contract for the water tower? And I asked that
Correct.
because-
Yes, that contract has been approved, and it's actually, I mean, it's moving. It's on the ground.
The other projects would still have to be bid and would be subject to.
McFarland is ready to bid, I believe. I mean, that's ready to go now. So that's 4.4 of that. We already know that the 6th Avenue water line design is underway. So once that comes, we have that ready to go to bid. That's going to happen sooner rather than later. And then the other one was the Loop 121 pumps. That's kind of a completely new project, but we're doing our best to help with water pressures and things at the jail. And that's what that project will do. So all of those are underway, or really need to be underway and now, as opposed to later. So that's some of the other benefits of doing this now rather than later.
I'm an advocate for asking for what you need, and I don't see any huge advantage to going out and asking for an additional 1.2 or increasing that bond amount for the later projects down the road. Just 7 million, right?
Well, I was going to ask kind of the opposite question from John. Is there well, I didn't see that, I didn't get to see the list very long, but is there anything that would be advantageous to add to that that's still needed to get that interest savings on the front end, which, you know, maybe that's the right decision, maybe it's not, but
We did go through a bit of that exercise, honestly. And so again, let's see, the projects that we're talking about, again, would be potentially those that we could accelerate are the ones in this 23 column. And when that's the big monkey, that 7.7 million for phase 2 of the treatment plant. And that's not ready yet to issue bonds for. We don't have a really good feel for that yet. These other ones, the other projects that you see here and here, just aren't yet. We don't have a good enough one of these and a timeline established yet to know for sure that, to pull the trigger now. So I would be hesitant to really advance fund those at this time.
but
So
if
we
the
kind
need
of,
arises in 2022, we could cash fund those.
correct.
As they hit the radar.
That's correct.
I mean, we don't have to wait to 2023 to use those cash funds to
Absolutely.
reduce the bond, because we'll essentially be reducing the bond by cash funding those.
That's correct.
earlier.
Absolutely.
What's going to trigger the bond issue in 23 is the sewer plant expansion. That's going to kind of drive the train. Those others are important. They're scheduled in 23, but the sewer plant is the big ticket item that, depending on the schedule of the plan review and approval, TCEQ's approval and all, that'll kind of drive the train on the decision on and the timeframe on when to go on that.
So to John's point, we're not really ready. The need is not high enough and we're not ready yet to look at any of those others for this bond.
Correct. That's correct.
So-
That number was off. I don't know why I said 1.2.
So again, thank you for putting the chart together. So the way I think about it is two different things. One is cost of money, and second is use of money, right? Two separate things. So the first thing is how much money are we going to have over this a period of time? And then if we were to have several strategies on how do we get that money over that period of time, that's what I came at. So if you go back to that deflecting those two graphs, those two lines. So these were the questions I was asking last time when I was, I think, not making a lot of sense, but this is what I had in my mind. If we borrow now and it's at this interest rate and we use cash now at this interest rate, when's the inflection point? When is one the better decision and when's the other? And so based on this, because we're not getting really anything, I put this model together on a Excel spreadsheet and said, okay, we'll get 0.25% interest on our cash and we'll get this and that. And so I started running the numbers, and in reality, because of the low numbers, the low percentage interest rate now and the anticipated inflation and the impact on interest rates over the next 3 years, you're better off. And instead of saying borrow, you're better off to buy a house in Belton 4 years ago than today, even if you didn't need it.
Yeah.
Because you could turn around and sell it today and cover all the interest costs plus. And so the flip side is not buying it, but using the asset of borrowing and saying, we're going to convert cash to borrowing or borrowing to cash. So anyway, so just from a financial perspective, Southwest Airlines calls it hedging. They buy fuel when they don't need it in the future because they think it might go up or down. So basically and I don't know if I can say that word here, but we're hedging the interest rates. I grew up on a farm, right? So, I mean, we hedge all the time. So that's all we're doing is we're hedging the rates. And by getting it under 10, it increases our flexibility. And I think we have a pretty certain, if we borrow 7 million, which is 2 to 3 million more, I'm pretty certain in 2 years, we will use that money. It's not like, it's not. And so anyway, so I just went through that number first is cost of cash and really, because I was not sold. It's like, why, pay it when you need it. But then when I started thinking about we're hedging against inflation, then it made sense. And it made $500,000 worth of sense based on just 13 million and the 7. So anyway, that was, and then it's like, okay, well, what's the timing and when you use it? And then we can debate on that. But yeah.
Is there a sweet spot in our bond capacity and maturity, and as opposed to just defaulting to 30-year bonds? Are we doing 5-year call protection?
Feel free to come. This is Jennifer Ritter.
Hi, Jennifer Ritter with Specialized Public Finance. So your bonds are traditionally sold as 20-year debt. This would be contemplated as a 20-year bond issue as well. In terms of a sweet spot in the market, investors right now are looking for short paper just because everyone thinks interest rates are going up, so they don't want to lock their money up long term. If you wanted to borrow for less than 20 years, certainly we probably get a little bit of a benefit on the interest rate, but at that point, the payments annually are a little bit higher. So I kind of think actually 20 years is probably your sweet spot, because you could go to 30, but we're not doing that. We're keeping it at 20. In terms of the call itself, which was the other question that you referenced, typically the municipal bond market has a 10-year standard call. In the terms that your finance director here was laying out, we're actually saying that we will have 9 years or shorter for the call protection. I think we can do that without paying a penalty. So that's kind of where it gets into it, is do we want to pay extra for a shorter call? If we can get to 8 without what I think is a penalty on the day of pricing, we'll do that. But much below 8, you're gonna start to pay for it.
And with rates where they are, that more than likely wouldn't happen, but. just-
No, but I mean, that call option gives you the ability to either refund it for savings, should that happen. And again, that's probably
just pay it off.
unlikely, or pay it off, right? To your point. So, but if it's a 20-year deal and we get an 8-year call on it, more than 50% of the debt is prepayable without penalties. So it's at your option, not at the buyer's option. So we'll do as short as we can, but I don't want to push it so short that you're paying extra for it, because it kind of defeats the purpose of this hedge.
Do you ever put in a provision to just issue bonds at par?
Well, you'd pay extra for it. So that the market's come a little bit back in terms of a par, as opposed to the premiums that we're starting to see, which I know councils always are like, wait, we sold 7 million of bonds, but the par face amount here is 6.2. That's weird. And just so everybody knows, that's because the coupon is higher than the yield, the real offering yield on the bond issue itself. And that's because, again, investors have assumed for the last 10 years that interest rates would be higher than they are when they sold the bond. So it gives them protection in the secondary market to have that higher coupon. So they're willing to pay more for that upfront. If we start retail investors, or mom and pops, as we call them, as opposed to institutions, like a par type of structure, but there aren't a lot of those people buying the bonds anymore, especially with the tax rates where they are. It's pretty low, is it, from a relative historical standpoint. So you don't get a lot of individuals buying muni bonds. So we're stuck with what the institutions want. And the institutions typically like a 5% coupon. We're actually kind of working them down on 3 to 4%, somewhere in that neighborhood. But when we do a competitive sale where the lowest interest rate, true interest cost, or the average interest rate is the winning one, we have no control over those coupons.
Have you seen some rates recently?
In terms of just general interest rates?
Well, no, bonds being issued in a private placement, or what, the small sale, 10 million or less.
Competitive sale. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Competitive sale.
Yeah, absolutely. We're probably in a 2.25 range right now. If we were to sell, I mean, earlier, a couple of months ago, we were probably around 2. So there has been a bit of an increase in rates with the Fed action. That was kind of priced into the market. It's basically like gas prices. You get hours notice before they go up. So there's not much you can do to beat them to the punch. But we have started to see a little bit of the interest rates start to increase. But as I was talking with Mike about before the meeting, there's still a dearth of supply, or not enough municipal bonds out there in the market, because we're still kind of in pandemic or recovery from the pandemic. There's a lot of people who want a safe investment. And muni bonds with your AA- bond rating are still considered a safe investment. In some cases, maybe safer than the US government's bonds, quite frankly. So we're still seeing, because there's not a lot of your types of bonds trading out in the market, that lack of supply is still keeping our interest rates relatively low. So hopefully, since we're talking about potentially a January sale, should council decide to move forward, hopefully we can kind of lock those in before early next year stuff starts to kind of go crazy. At the timing that we're looking at here with January 11th, you'd be one of the earlier sales in the new year.
Perfect. Thanks for all your help.
Sure.
Thanks, Jennifer. Any other questions or comments from council members?
Help me understand the lock-in, if we make the decision, the lock-in at the rate, when the lock-in would be.
So
and
yeah,
maybe a wild guess at what it might look like.
so excellent question. So the action tonight gives you the ability to move forward with the bond sale. It doesn't obligate you to do so should you change your mind. Interest rates will be locked in when we sell on January 11th.
Okay.
So the morning of January 11th, we're not committing to a time yet, because we'll want to look in the market and see what other deals are there and get you the most attention. Could be 9, 9:30, 10, somewhere in there, is when we'll actually go out, seek interest rates that morning. they'll bid an interest rate and we'll know who the winner is. But until council takes action that evening at 5:30 PM, your action will lock in the interest rate. So once they bid on January 11th, and once you say yes, it's locked. They can't change at that point. I'm hoping that, again, it's about 2.25 right now. I'm hoping that we're south of 240, somewhere in that neighborhood, mid twos at most. Historically, if we could sell below 4%, that was great. Now it became, if we can sell below 3%. So we're still in very good interest rate environment, but my hope is that we stay certainly below that 2.4.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? I like the fact that big 2023 bond issue would be less than $10 million. I think that's one of the things that
It's a big deal.
it could be a really big deal depending on what happens in the market in the future. And obviously inflation and whatever else is going on. John, I'm sure you can figure it out, but anyway, I appreciate it. It looks like when we first started talking about borrowing money when we didn't really have to, it always kind of throws up a red flag, like David said. And but thinking it through, it certainly makes more sense. Do I hear a resolution or any other question or comment?
One more question, actually. On the fund balance, we had 7 million in fund balance in this fund, correct? Usable 4.4.
We are right now, as it sits, we will probably end this fiscal year at about 6.5 million of spendable reserves in the utility fund. So I have some other things for that. That's 72% of budgeted expenditures as it sits, which is also 3.8 million above the 30% floor, which is kind of what we've been talking about. So 3.8 million. And again, I'm just going to turn around and use that 3.8 million. We were planning on using it this year. We're going to push that out till 2023, and then we'll come back with a big reduction in fund balance in 2023 as opposed to 2020.
How much we projected to add to that fund balance? Do you know?
That is a number that's, you mean in 22? In 22, I have, the budget is flat revenues, and expenditure. So no growth necessarily expected. In fact, I think there's a slight draw on fund balance planned. Doesn't
I was
mean it's
just
going to happen.
wasn't sure historically if we've had an increase in fund balance. If we did nothing, would we have enough cash in 2023 to still be under $10 million would be the question. That'd be the only caveat to.
If you say, so if we did, if you
we did
decided to
what,
use that
6
cash today, I'm going to be down close to the $2.7 million.
Yeah.
So I won't be anywhere near paying for the 2023 stuff.
No, I
at
just
all.
wasn't sure, like, over the last 5 years, how much have we historically put into fund balance? That would be my only, again, it can be a question that can be answered because we have time minus some expenses, but should have asked probably beforehand.
I'd be happy to give you that information, but I don't have it just right now.
I move we approve agenda item number 5.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve a resolution authorizing the publication of a notice of intent to issue City of Belton, Texas combination tax and limited revenue certificates of obligation series 2022 in a maximum amount not to exceed $7 million. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item number 6, consider an ordinance adopting a budget amendment number 2 to the City of Belton fiscal year 2021 annual budget. Mike?
Okay, so fiscal year 21 is wrapping up now. Officially closes on the 15th of this month. So that gives us time now to kind of do some housekeeping, if you will, to cover expenditures that happen throughout the year that weren't anticipated. And I'm going to start with one of those that's really not a housekeeping measure, if you will, because of the size of it. But again, much like the utility fund, we talked about drawing down reserves in the general fund to cash fund several projects. 1.889 million, to be precise, for these projects that you see there. So West 13th and North College is a $1.3 million project. We need to replace the roof at the police department for $325,000. Splash pad improvements are 90,000, exercise and playground equipment, et cetera, 88. And then some trail replacement on Nolan Creek for 36,000. $1,889,000 for those projects that will cash fund with budget amendment number 1, with revision number 1 as part of this budget amendment. Parks Recreation Facility Division went over budget by about $36,000 due to some winter storm activity that we had to pay for, fuel costs, facility repairs, et cetera. So this revision item is going to increase appropriations in that fund by $36,100. Solid waste revenue went up, exceeded budget. And because this is a pass through, that also meant our expenditures exceeded budget. So revision item number 3 is going to add 15,000 to both revenue and expenditures for solid waste. Go ahead. So the TERS fund hired a consultant during the year to look at the future of the TERS, expansion and beyond 2024. That cost of $36,000 exceeds budget, so we need to add appropriations to the TERS fund for that. Engineering and consulting services related to the Northwest Belton water study and Sparta and Avenue O generator projects exceeded budget by $29,150. So we're going to increase appropriations there. And also our revenues and expenditures related to credit card processing has increased by over $40,000. And so we're going to increase revenue and expenditures both by that amount to cover unanticipated costs. In 2020, BCWCID issued like $6 million worth of debt for Belton specific projects. We're the ones that are paying the debt service for that. And there was kind of a misunderstanding when we were developing the fiscal year 21 budget. We thought that we would have to pay or have to send them 3 months worth of payments. And actually they started on October 1st. So we had to send them 12 months worth of payments so they could make the first payment when it was due. It was just a misunderstanding, really. We under budgeted that by like $250,000. Treated water costs actually went over budget as well by about $40,000. So revision number 7 is going to increase appropriations to cover those costs that have already been incurred.
All that extra chlorine.
Yes, sir. That's a 22 cost.
Sorry.
And
It is a lot of it.
there was a lot of it. That's
Some of
good.
the
Now
things
that's
like, what the heck? I thought I was out the pool and it's like, oh no, that's the water.
That's good. There were 2 generator projects. We again mentioned Sparta and Avenue O. Those projects actually started in fiscal year 20 and they carried forward into 21, but we did not add appropriations to the 21 budget to cover that ongoing costs. So this revision item will actually do that and cover the cost there in that particular division. And let's see. So also, you'll recall that at the end of the year, as we were adopting the budget for fiscal year 21, we added $345,000 into the other cost division for pay plan related costs. So what this revision item does is distributes that from one division, the other cost division, into all of the other places that needed money for pay plan increases. Which is also why I eliminated other cost divisions for 22. So that's what this item is. It's a lengthy one, but it's just really moving appropriations from one place to the other. This last one we don't need. In the event that we weren't going to issue debt, I'd have to add a line to transfer that $3 million for cash funded projects. So that leaves me with that slide there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Could you go back to that first slide just for a minute,
Yes, sir.
just to see what all was on there again?
Don't let me go too far. That one right there. Yes, sir.
Thanks. I was just.
Mike, number 4, can TERS not pay for the consultant?
TERS did. Let's see, wait, let me back up. Let me make sure we're talking about the same thing. Mayor, I'll get back to that one.
Oh,
The TERS is paying for that consult. This is the TERS fund that I'm amending with this item.
okay.
It's just, we didn't budget for it. And so that's the 36,000 that cost that we have to
Not our
cover.
general fund.
Correct. That's a good observation. That's correct. That's TERS fund.
What is the, crazy question, what's the net of all these revisions? Ish,
Oh, good. That's a
I'm
great
sorry.
question that I didn't do the math for.
okay, I didn't
Um,
either, I apologize.
There is a net increase to the budget, but this is the biggest part of it right here.
Mhm, right,
And you could see in these revision items where I could increase revenue
mhm,
to kind of offset that, I did.
Mhm.
This is the big driver. So for a budget in total budget increase
mhm.
to the general fund for this item. And then some of the bigger, there was a bigger water project in one of these revisions, the carryover stuff, I think,
Mhm, right.
where I didn't have enough money, revenues, if you will, to kind of cover that. So I think the expenditure budget increased 100,000 or so in the water sewer side.
Thank you.
But that's the biggest one that would cause a net increase to the
Gotcha.
budget.
I just want to go back and look at that number on the West 13th and North College. But I drove that again this weekend when I went to the Mary Hardin Baylor football game. Just-
Oh, and that's been a long time coming.
I was going to say, we've talked about that since,
Could not be more excited. about
I'm
that.
so excited about
I
it.
can't remember how many years we talked about
I
that.
was foolish enough to drive it 3 times this weekend.
Yeah.
It broke my foot.
Yeah.
That's where I broke my
that's-
foot.
Thank you for
Another
that
budget
one.
revision.
I should say,
Get a lawyer.
again, our plan was as part of this to draw down fund balance to get us closer to 30, which will be in our new policies, kind of the number we want to maintain. This item is going to take us below 30. It will be like a 29 something of the amended budget.
Mm.
It's a little over, it'll be right around 30 compared to the current fiscal 22 budget. So we're not going to be really, I don't think, violating our policy that we'll adopt later. This does accomplish exactly what you wanted to accomplish. We're using with reserves to get us closer to that 30% floor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Do I hear a
Make a
motion?
motion that we amend the budget as presented.
Second.
All those in
budgets.
favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. There being no further business, we are adjourned.